Dave Sanderson is an inspirational survivor, speaker, and author. His thoughts on leadership have made him an internationally sought-out speaker. When U.S. Airways Flight 1549, known as the Miracle on the Hudson, ditched into the Hudson River on January 15, 2009, Dave Sanderson knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Since the Miracle on the Hudson, which is considered to be the most successful ditching in aviation history, Dave Sanderson has built a career as a motivational speaker, mentor, and author. In his presentations, he shares the 12 resources he and others used, not only during the Miracle on Hudson, but during his 30 years in sales and sales management, his 10 years with and leading Tony Robbins' security team, and the precepts that have enabled him to become a top producer in some of the largest sales organizations in the world, and ultimately enabled him to survive the plane crash. So it is a delight to have Dave with us today, and I will turn this over to you. Dave, welcome.
Well, welcome. Thank you for having me today, and I'm really excited to be back with you, and I appreciate everybody dialing in today. I hope we'll have a good about 55 minutes to share some information that hopefully not only will add value to you in your business, but hopefully in your personal life likewise. But before we start, I just want to give you a little background on how this whole thing really came about and was generated, and why I found it important and why I talk and teach on it now. Back in 1999, I was asked by Disneyland to help them with a problem they were having. And the problem they were having is that their workers' compensation insurance was going sky high in their character department because characters were getting injured. And subsequently, it got into the press. And once it got into the press, they had a lot of negative media. So whenever something gets like that, you got to take pretty quick action on it. And since they knew that I had been with Tony Robbins and leading his security team, I had some skill sets that would equate to being able to help them not only understand what was going on, but able to helpfully reduce the incidents around the park. And what was happening is the characters were getting either accosted either by malintent or just by people who were excited. And when that happened, characters were getting injured. And when characters got injured, the compensation went up. So there was a big issue. So they needed to have a strategy and understand why it was happening, number one, but two, how could characters who don't speak be able to help defend themselves and put themselves in a better situation not to get injured. And that's how this program called Situational Awareness came out. And there's four key things that I'm really going to discuss today and talk about today about how you can not only improve some of the strategies you're using to communicate and why people do what they do, but also hopefully give you a success model that understand why and how you can improve on what you're doing in your business and your personal life. The first thing I want to talk about is the leadership strategy was employed not only that day on the Hudson, but you can also achieve and use in your business. The second thing I'm going to share with you, and that second item we're going to talk about and share is a skill set that allows you to bring all your team members to play at the same level, which it may seem like impossible, but I've been on teams that raise their standards and raise their levels that play on the same level and achieve outstanding results. We're going to talk about skill sets that allow you to do that. The third thing we're going to discuss is an approach to communication to create instant rapport. And once I realized this changed not only the direction of my business life, but changed my entire relationship with my wife and my family. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that approach is and how you can use that in your business and your personal life. And the fourth thing is I'm going to share with you a tool to help you not only whether it's external customers or your internal associates into raving fans of you and what you're doing. Those are the four things, the four outcomes that we're going to try to take away from today. Before we start on that, though, I want to just give you a little background about not only what happened that day on the Hudson River and how I employed some of these strategies and tools that day to not only help me, but hopefully help some other people that day achieve an outcome that went from a potential tragedy into a miracle. As you may know, the Miracle on the Hudson was the plane that crashed into the Hudson River. The movie Sully was made based on what happened that day in Captain Sullenberger's life. A couple key things about that day. I was not supposed to be on the plane that day. I was supposed to be on the 5 o'clock flight. But I caught an earlier flight because we started our day in the warehouse in Brooklyn about 5 a.m., so we got done about 10 a.m. And I travel over 100,000 miles a year, so any chance to get home to my wife and kids a little early, I usually try to take advantage of that. So that's why I got on the plane an earlier flight, which was 15:49, the Miracle on the Hudson. There was nothing extraordinary about the day. It was 11 degrees and snowing, and I was one of the first set of passengers to board the plane that day. And about 60 seconds after we took off is when I heard the explosion on the plane. And it was a loud explosion. I had never heard anything on a plane like that before. So it sort of got my attention. And when I looked up and looked out the window, I saw fire coming out from beneath the left wing. So I knew something had happened. I also knew planes lose engines. So I really didn't know until as we crossed over the George Washington Bridge, and he only cleared the bridge by about 400 feet when he said his famous words, "brace for impact," to how dire the situation was. And once Captain Sullenberger said those famous words, and if you saw the movie Sully, you know what I'm talking about, is when I think everybody realized something negative was probably going to happen on that plane. But as the captain skillfully glided the plane and got it into the Hudson River in one piece, that was part one. Part two was getting out of the plane. And I was in seat 15A, I was towards the back of the plane. So when he hit, water started coming in immediately from the bottom and the back of the plane. And by the time I stood up, water was about knee to waist deep from where I was on the plane. And I became the last passenger out of the plane, and it wasn't by design, and I'll share later how that happened. But as I got out of the plane, I was looking to get on the wing like everybody else, but there was no room on the wing or the boat for me. So that's why I was inside the plane roughly for 7 minutes, waist deep in 36-degree water, in handling the situation on the right side of the plane. And so there was a lot of things that happened, which I'll sort of share with stories and details of some of those lessons and strategies from that day. But it wasn't my intent to be the last passenger out, but by circumstance and the way things played out, that's how I became the last passenger out. And a lot of things were done on the right side of the plane, and I'm going to detail here in a few minutes. The first area we're going to talk about is probably one of my favorite subjects. It's called state management. Now, what is state management? You may have heard this term before in a lot of different ways. Most of the time when you hear the word or the phrase state management, it means how do you manage your mind to get to the appropriate place in a situation. And that can be joy or happiness or hope. It can be any kind of state that you want to be in, but it's how do you do that? How do you put yourself in that state when you need to put yourself in that state? See, one of the things I've learned over my life that, depression is a state just like joy or happiness or hope. And any state can be changed. See, if you want to be happy one moment, want to be sad the next, you can change it just like that. And there are three ways that you can do that. The first way to change anything, the way you change your state, the way you focus on things is your physiology. How do you move your body? Your physiology. And that's the easiest and fastest way to move anybody's state. See, if you get up and move around, all of a sudden, you've engaged what's called endorphins in your body, and all of a sudden, you've changed your state. The second way to manage your state or change your state is what you focus on. And that's how Captain Sullenberger managed his state that day. See, he couldn't get up and jump around and move his body around in the cockpit. He had to sit there and he had to focus on the outcome. See, a lot of people who go into a negative state focus on something called why does this happen to me syndrome. They get so deep into it and they can't dig themselves out, so they get to that depressed state so they don't know how to get out of it. And by the way, by managing your focus and what you focus on, you can change that depressed state into a state of joy and happiness by just how you focus on what you're focusing on in that moment in time. The third way you manage your state is through what's called your language or your internal dialogue. And that's how I managed my state that day on the plane. See, it's all about the questions you ask yourself, your internal dialogue. And I asked myself that day different questions because I couldn't get up and move around. Candidly, I didn't know what to focus on, but I knew how to manage my state by asking myself different questions. And one of the questions I asked myself that day was, how can I add even more value and enjoy the process? Because I knew something I was going to enjoy it either up in heaven or I was going to enjoy it back on earth. But I kept saying that positive question in my mind, and that's how I managed my state that day during the plane crash. And that's what I did in business situations likewise. When I got into a business situation or any personal situation with my family, I always wanted to focus on how to get myself in the appropriate state. Do I need to be in a state of excitement, state of happiness, state of hope? What kind of state do I need to be in for that situation? And that's one of the things that I think changed not only the way I managed my business, but how I became a top producer and became the head of security for a gentleman named Tony Robbins. You know, I took this little article out of Entrepreneur Magazine because it sort of tells in that article how Captain Stellenberger managed his state that day. And if you notice here in bold, it says, create calm in yourself in the situation. He had to manage the state by focus, and this is how he did it when he lost both engines, and he had that startle, that one moment. And if you notice, if you saw the plane in the movie Sully, you notice how Tom Hanks handled that. He did a brilliant job of when he said my plane and had to focus on the outcome. He says here, turn down the volume, lowering your voice, take a deep breath, and mentally hit the reset button to start focusing in on. You know, so the three ways you can manage your state in any situation is through your physiology, through what you focus on, and the language or your internal dialogue, the questions you ask yourself. The second thing that happened that day, and which helped me not only in the plane crash, but helped me in business, is understanding why people do what they do. I became fascinated with this. I learned this back in 1994 when I first went to a seminar, and I heard this for the first time, and it really started resonating with me. And because all of a sudden I understood why I did what I did, why the people around me did what they did, and it helped me analyze and be able to be more in sync with not only my family, but the people I was associating with, and understanding why they did what they did so I could either encourage it or not encourage it. The first primary reason people do what they do is the need for certainty. You know, it's our need to feel in control and know what's coming next so we can feel secure. It's the need for basic comfort and the need to avoid pain and stress, and also to create pleasure. Our need for certainty is a survival mechanism. It affects how much we risk and what we're willing to take in life, what kind of risk we're willing to take in life, in our jobs, in our investments, in our relationships. The higher you have the need for certainty, the less risk you'll be willing to take or emotionally bear. By the way, have you ever heard the term risk tolerance? This is what the need that's driving that, the amount of risk I can handle, I can tolerate. The second primary reason people do what they do, or primary need, is the need for uncertainty, or better known as variety. So let me ask you a question. Do you like surprises? If you answered yes, you're kidding yourself. You like the surprises you want. The ones you don't want, you call problems. But you still need to put some muscle back in your life. You cannot grow muscle or character unless you have something to push back on. And the need for variety does that. You know, the interesting thing about the need for variety, though, is the opposite of the need for certainty. Because what happens is people get so much certainty in their life, they have that midlife crisis you may have heard of when they need to do something different. So now they go out jumping out of planes and climbing mountains and buying their sports cars. They have the need for variety because they've had so much certainty. But if you have so much variety in your life, sometimes you just need to hunker down. And that's the one thing that really was noticeable in my relationship with my wife, was my wife's primary need in her life. Her worldview is based on certainty. She wants to be in control. And my primary driving need right now, at my age, I'm 56 years old, is the need for variety. You know, when you go through a plane crash, you have a lot of blessings. You're like, wow, I really want to live now. I may not have another chance. So when you have somebody who lives in a world of certainty and a person who lives in a world of variety or uncertainty, sometimes it can cause a challenge in your relationships. So then you have to really look at how can I give that person certainty and live in my uncertain world. And that's what happened when I left my job of certainty I had for 30-plus years, and to go to a life of entrepreneurship. I had to give her certainty. And so that's one thing I realized. So the first two primary needs are certainty and variety. The third need, though, is the need for significance. You know, we all need to feel important, special or unique or needed. So it's how does somebody get significance? How do you get it by earning millions and millions of dollars, or by collecting different academic degrees, or distinguish yourself with a master's or a PhD? You can build a giant Twitter following like a lot of people do, or you can go to The Bachelor, or be a housewife of Orange County. You can do a lot of things to be seen significant. You know, but you think, you know, spending a lot of time on money can make you feel significant, and so by spending very little. But we all know people who constantly brag about their bargains, or how they feel special by how much money they make, or the homes they have, or all these different things. Some very wealthy people gain significance by hiding their wealth. like the late Sam Walton. I talk about Sam Walton a lot, the founder of Walmart, for a time the richest man in America. He drove around in a pickup truck around Arkansas. You know, no one would ever know that he was the wealthiest man in the world. You know, he had his private fleet standing by when he needed it, but he didn't want to project that out there. So significance is also a moneymaker. That's where people like Steve Wynn have made his fortune. You know, the need to feel significant is one of the primary driving needs everybody has. So everybody wants to stand out. Everybody wants to be the leader. Everybody wants to be the person, so here I did it. But the fourth primary need is the need for connection, or the need for love. You know, love is the oxygen of life, and that's what we all need and want most. When we love completely or connect completely, we feel like we're alive. And when we lose that connection, the pain is so great, most people just don't know what to do with themselves. They crumble. If you can get that sense of connection through intimacy or friendship or prayer or walking in nature, if nothing else works, some people just go get a dog because they need that connection. So the first four needs are what I call the needs for the personality, the things that everybody has. We find ways to meet these, whether by working harder or coming up with a bigger problem or creating stories to rationalize. The last two needs we'll talk about is the needs of the spirit or spirituality. These are rare. Not everybody gets these needs, but everybody has these driving needs for these, driving passion for these. The next need is the need for growth. See, if you're not growing, you're dying. If a relationship's not growing, if a business is not growing, if you're not growing, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, or how many friends you have, or how many Twitter followers you have, or the people that love you. You're not going to have experience that real fulfillment in life. And the reason we grow is so we have something of value to give. The sixth primary need, and the second, what I call the spiritual need, is the need for contribution. You know, it may sound a little corny, but the real secret to living is really giving. You know, life is not about me. It's about all of us and we. You can see that right now, what's going on in Texas. Neighbors taking care of neighbors, strangers taking care of strangers. It's all about a bigger purpose. It's, you know, it's call somebody you love and you want to share it. It enhances everything and all about your experience. See, life is really about creating the meaning around your life, and meaning does not come from what you get. It comes from what you give. Ultimately, it's not what you get what makes you happy long term, but rather who you become and what you contribute will. So these six primary needs are what people drive for in their life, and everybody has these primary needs. So you look at an example, and I'll give this as a negative example, but it shows you why things happen in your life. And I use this example of in the area of terrorism and ISIS. And ISIS is, people ask, well, why do these kids grow and want to be in Al-Qaeda or ISIS or commit terrorist acts? And the reason is because they meet all six of their primary needs of their life. Just think about it. If you're a young man and you find out that you can go be a part of this group, you have certainty. You're a part of a group. You're part of a clan. You get certainty by being a part of a group. But you also get a lot of uncertainty or variety because you don't know what we're going to do next. Are we going to blow up somebody's car? Are we going to fly a plane into a building? So variety, we don't know what we're going to do next. And, of course, you're going to feel significant because you're going to be in the news every single moment of every single day. Everybody is looking at you. Everybody is focusing on you. You're totally significant. But you also have connection because you're connecting to your greater being and the greater mission of what's going on. And you're possibly growing because, you know, you're going to grow in your organization you're with or how you go or the assignments you get. And then you're contributing to what's the greater good or getting my big quan, what they call quan, up in heaven. So if you look on what's going on in the world of terrorism and why these young men are attracted to this type of terroristic mindset, is because it meets all their needs. Just like what's going on in Texas right now. People, the reason they're flooding to Texas, literally flooding to Texas, is because it meets all of their needs. They can meet every one of these needs to have contribution and growth and connect with people and be seen significant because they're on TV. You know, variety, you know, the floods are coming, they don't know what's going to do, and they have certainty because they're a part of a group that's helping. So if you can identify, you can see pretty much why people do what they do based on the needs that they're approaching and going for. And if anybody obtains three needs out of any situation, they're obsessed about it. That's why people are attracted, and that's why people do what they do. It's based on these six primary needs. And everybody's got their own primary need out of this need. What do I mean by that? Well, I'll give you an example. Like I told you earlier, my wife, his primary need out of these 6 needs is the need for certainty. Above all these other ones, she needs to have certainty before she has love, she has connection, she has significance. She wants certainty. And right now, my primary need is the need to contribute and need for variety. So I base everything that I do based on those value sets on how I make my decisions. So once again, these are the 6 needs. Identify with your spouse, your relationship, your significant other, your teammates at work. What is the need they're driving for, and how do I want to help that need, or do I not want to help that need? There might be times when you have people at work who all they want is their own personal significance and not looking at the team, or so they need to maybe address their primary need. So once again, this is probably one of the most important things, and you can see how passionate I am because I talk a lot about it, because I think if you understand how to identify the needs and primary need of somebody, you can understand what drives them and how to communicate and effectively move and negotiate with them in the most effective manner. The third skill set that we talk about I talk about the communication skill that I learned many years ago, and I used not only that day on the Hudson River, but I used it in everything that I did in my business and in my personal life. And it's called sensory acuity. And what is sensory acuity? Well, everybody has 5 modalities that they have in their life. Number 1, they have visual, they can see. Second, they have auditory, they can speak. Third, they have kinesthetic, they can feel. Fourth is they have olfactory, they can smell. Fifth, they have gustatory, they can taste. Everybody has these 5 modalities unless you have a physical or health condition which prohibits you from having it. So everybody has these, but the top 3, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, is where people primarily communicate in. You can communicate in taste and also smell likewise, but the 3 primary modalities people communicate in are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And I'll give you a very extreme example. I'll talk about my wife again. My wife's primary modality, I didn't realize this, we've been married 30-plus years, I didn't realize this till the 15-year mark. But at the 15-year mark, we were having some challenges with our relationship. And candidly, it was one of those times when, we just weren't communicating effectively. I didn't know what she was thinking. She didn't know what I was thinking. It wasn't going well until all of a sudden I started understanding this strategy on how to communicate through sensory acuity. And I finally figured out that my wife's primary modality she resides in is auditory. My wife loves to talk. My wife can get on the phone and talk for 30 minutes and never take a breath. And if you interrupt her, she gets very upset because she needs to communicate her thoughts and wants you to tell her everything that she knows through speaking. Well, here I am a visual communicator. I'm a high visual. If you show me something in 15 or 20 seconds, I pretty much got it. I visually see it. I can design it. I can do it, and I can execute. I don't need 30 minutes of discussion on how to do things. So that would also challenge me in business meetings, because sometimes you get in business meetings and you have an auditory presenter in a business meeting who wants to show you and tell you everything about what you need to know, and they show you a picture and you got it. It's like, I got it. Why do I need to sit here for another 2 hours? That's why a lot of people are challenged in business meetings, is because you have the way that people are communicating is not the way people are receiving it. So if you can understand, if you have a visual communicator and an auditory communicator in a relationship, you can see where some challenges were had, until I realized I had to go into an auditory mode when I communicate with my wife. I had to back off the visual, communicate auditorily, let her speak, and feed it back to her. Once I started doing that, I started realizing our relationship changed 180 degrees. I started implementing that in my business. So when I would go to a business meeting or a negotiation or a sales presentation, whatever I was involved with, I would identify who was in the room, what modalities were in the room, and I would speak to each modality when I would present. I still do that today when I go on stage, when I speak all over the world, because I know in that room you're going to have auditory, visual, and kinesthetic people. So my presentation, and if you ever heard me speak, you'll notice I do a visual, I do an auditory, I do a kinesthetic. I connect with every one of the modalities that I want to be in sync and connect on people's levels. This one technique of my communication skill changed the entire way that not only my relationship went, but how my sales and production went in my business, just by learning this. So I want to give you a very visual example. And you see, we'll talk about Disneyland. I mentioned Disneyland before because that's where I did this this study, and I implemented some of these strategies we're talking about today. And so put yourself, if you've ever been to Disneyland or even Disney World, but Disneyland is probably a better example. And just think if you're at Disneyland and you pull up in the parking lot, and the first thing you see in Disneyland is the big Disneyland logo on the fence right there as you're walking in. You see it. So you got that visual going. Now you get that feeling of what you've had all your life. Man, I'm at Disneyland. Man, this is going to be an unbelievable experience. This is Disneyland. And all of a sudden you hear those sounds, that music playing. Anybody ever been to a Disneyland or Disney World? That's a small world over and over their head? That's by design. So now you've entered the gates. You paid your $125 for your ticket. You're in, and you're walking down Main Street, USA, whether that's World or Land. You've got the visual. You see the castle in front of you. You hear the music playing. You got that feeling going, and what do? You smell that cinnamon smell that comes up. And why do I smell cinnamon smell? Because Disneyland is piping those smells in. Each one of the different areas in the park have a different smell. And it's because they want to engage you on that, because if they engage you with smell, they'll engage you on taste, which is gustatory. So therefore, you'll go buy something to eat. You'll get the cotton candy, or you'll get a big cinnamon roll. So immediately, within the time you paid your ticket and walked through the gates, Disneyland has figured out the strategy of hitting you with every one of the modalities. So, because they do not know which modality is your primary modality, which one do you reside in most in your life. So that way, your average ticket price, instead of being $125 or $150 for the day, quadruples. That's why the parks do such a great job, not only servicing their customers, but also driving revenue. It's because they hit you with all the modalities. Just like Coca-Cola does in the commercial, just like Pepsi, just like Budweiser, just like car dealerships like Chevrolet, they hit you with these different modalities and the modality they want you to reside in. So that's, I give you a very visual example of Disneyland, what I'm talking about. If you've ever been to Disneyland and or Disney World, there's a park inside the park called Critter Country. And Critter Country basically is the story of Pooh. Now, why do I take the story of Pooh? Because this really stands out on sensory acuity, on what they do to make sure you can connect with the characters in the park. You notice me, that's me actually standing there with Tigger with my thumb up. That was the day that I actually went into character mode. It was walking with the characters that day to see what was happening. So you look at the left, you see Eeyore. And look at the color of Eeyore. He's gray or very pale blue. Eeyore's got his hands up, his eyes are down. All you ever hear is see Eeyore. Eeyore's he's very depressed all the time. He's always looking down. So if you notice, he doesn't have that connection. He doesn't have that kinesthetic connection with anybody. He doesn't have the auditory. He doesn't really have the visual. But people love Eeyore because he's always down. They want to hug somebody who's depressed. Then you move over to Pooh. Pooh, look at the colors of Pooh. Pooh are yellow and red, little brighter colors. Pooh is, people love to hug Pooh. Everybody loves to hug a bear. Pooh also, in the comics, in the strips, talks. So Pooh has that connection, honey, 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 honey. So he not only has an auditory connection, but he also has a kinesthetic connection. But then you look at Tigger. Tigger is orange. Tigger's got his thumb up. Tigger is always bouncing around on his tail. That's what Tiggers do. And Tigger hits the modalities of not only visual, because he's bright color, he's moving around, you have to watch what he does, but he's always bouncing around. He's got the auditory because he's, bing, bing, you hear the springing of his tail as he's bouncing around, and also the kinesthetic. People love to hug Tigger. So what Disney has done here in every one of their parks, so the next time you go to a Disney park, look at these different characters. Look how they're positioned. Look how they're put together. So they hit every one of the modalities. And that way you'll connect with the characters. And they know that, like I mentioned, everybody's got their primary modality. I would question, what is your primary modality? What modality do you reside in most? Are you primarily an auditory person? Do you need to be told things to get things accomplished? Are you visual? If you show you something, can you pick it up pretty quick and run with it? Or are you kinesthetic? Do you need to sort of touch your way around and feel your way around it? And one of the ways you can identify how your team members, what primary modality your team members in, are ask them a question and see how they answer it. And see if they answer it like, I see what you're saying, I hear what you're saying, I feel what you're saying. Based on that response, you'll get a pretty good idea of what primary modality that person resides in. So now you can communicate in their modality. So if someone says, I see that, so I see what you're saying. Feed it back to them. So now you build connection and rapport based on being in the same modality that person's in. It's one of the greatest rapport building tools around. You'll see people, the kinesthetic people come up, they want to touch you on the shoulder or give you a hug. Auditory people will always say, hello, thank you, welcome. They'll always be speaking first before they connect with you on a different level. So take from this, think, what is your primary modality? What are the people you surround yourself's primary modality is? And try to communicate them. Go home tonight to your significant other or your spouse. Try to find out what their primary modality is. Speak in their primary modality and see how much more connection you may have just based on changing that one thing. How to communicate more effectively in the other person's primary modality. One of the most exciting things I love to talk about is why do people get success and why people don't get success, whether it's their job, sports, in their lives. And I've learned this, it's called the success model. And I learned this many years ago when I had the opportunity to be with Tony Robbins. I was asked to be with him when he got invited to speak to the Washington Capitals NHL team in Washington. But the Capitals had lost many games in a row. They were in last place. They were not going any place. And Tony was brought in to really help them get motivated, inspire them to hopefully resurrect the season. And I was in the back watching as this was going on. So you have to remember, you have a bunch of multimillionaires sitting in there who think they know everything, who have accomplished a lot to get to where they're at. So who's going to tell them how to succeed in hockey when, hey, this guy doesn't play hockey, he probably can't even spell hockey. And it was spellbinding to me because it taught me why I always succeeded or why I didn't succeed. So if you look at this model, it's called the success model. And if you think of not only your business, but just think of a team. Just whatever, pick out the favorite team. Just pick out the Chicago Bulls when they were winning 6 championships. How did somebody not only win 1 championship, but win multiple championships, or the Golden State Warriors, or the New England Patriots? Pick out a championship team, and this is the model they follow. First thing is every team when they start a year has potential. They think they know what they have on their team, and they have potential, but until you take action, which is step number 2, you really don't know. Why do you see the preseason going on in football right now? They really want to run everybody through and take action on seeing what they can do on the field. Once they take action, you get results out of that action. Are they positive results or are they negative results? And once you have results, you have either more certainty or uncertainty based on those results, which means now you go back to potential because now I know what the potential I have. Now I can take action to change that and give some different direction, different coaching, as we talk about, whether like a Bill Belichick or a coach like that or anybody a coach in business. Take some different actions, get different results, get more certainty, change more, get more potential, change a little bit more, and all of a sudden you start this cycle. And once you start getting some success, like the Bulls did, 1, 2, 3, then Michael Jordan left. When Michael Jordan left, they lost some potential. They didn't take the actions they needed to. They got negative results. They didn't have the certainty. They didn't win until Michael Jordan came back. They had more potential, took more action, got better results, got more certainty. This one area, if you want to take your team and through this and identify what potential do you have on the team to get the outcomes you're looking for? What actions do we need to take? Test those actions. Take those actions. Document those results. And once you document the results, you can see what kind of belief system or certainty you can have out of that, saying, I've got this result before. If I did a little bit more, how much more? If I did a little more action results, how much more can I get out of it? That's what happened to me back in the early 90s when I went to my first seminar. I went to my first seminar. I took massive action. I lost 25 pounds. I became the top sales producer that year in my company. All of a sudden, I got great results. I had solid certainty. The next year, I went back to another seminar because you know what? I did it for once. I can do it again. So the whole cycle started. That's how I became a top producer and ultimately became the head of security for Tony Robbins because I took massive action. I got great results for him. He got more certainty than me, so I built this whole cycle up. This is how great teams, great organizations become not only great, but stay great. And why you see some organizations who don't stay great. And one right now you can target is Uber. Uber's having a real difficult time now. They've had some negative results from some very negative actions, so they don't have a lot of certainty. They got rid of their CEO, so now they're starting over again with a new CEO to take some more action. You can see it go out successful companies. You can see it from people who have gone down the other direction. The success model. Take it, apply it to your organizations, apply it to your team, and understand this model, and you'll see how you can start getting success and getting the results that you're looking for in your business and in your personal life. We talked about certainty in the last two sections, because certainty is the one thing people are looking for right now. One of the reasons this country is going through, the United States is going through what it's going through, is because there's not a lot of certainty going on right now. There's a lot of dissatisfaction, so people don't have certainty. And that first shows up in the stock market. And you notice the stock market went down this morning in the United States because of the actions that were taken last night in North Korea. So now people have uncertainty. So therefore, they don't know what they're going to do. So the question I always ask companies I work with is, what are you doing for your customers and associates to give them certainty? And I'll use my personal example. The day of the plane crash, I was in the hospital. I was one of two people that stayed the night in the hospital. And that night in the hospital, I only received one phone call, and that was from Tony Robbins. My company, who I was on business for, and I was on a 3-day business trip for and selling business for, didn't call me. And they didn't call my wife. So when I got back to Charlotte the next day, I didn't know they even knew that I had been in a plane crash. So I went by the office. And the first question was asked to me by one of the regional managers, you are going to Michigan next week, aren't you? And that told me something. Number one, I figured out I was just a number. I had been driving revenue for a multi-billion-dollar company all these years, and when things got tough, I was just a number. I had no certainty with my company. But that Saturday, which is the next day, at our house, we had a big box of food and toys from the company that I had just visited up in New York as a way to say thank you and supporting me and helping get me back on my feet. That gave me total certainty of what I was doing with my customer was right. So, I tell people, if you want to make a raving fan out of somebody, be their advocate. Go out of your way. Do whatever you have to do for your customers. See, I sometimes in my company, I was the black sheep because I always take my clients' point of view and perspective because I felt I was their advocate. They knew at 2 o'clock in the morning they could call me and things could get done, and that happened plenty of times. That's how I turned a potential client into a raving fan. You can do that not only with your clients, but you can do that within your team. You can do that also within your family. I would say if you have anybody on your team that goes through what I call a personal plane crash in their life, which everyone on this phone will have a personal plane crash in your life, which might be a fire, a flood, a health scare, a hurricane, a tornado, whatever that may be for you. Everybody here is going to have something. Be there for them on your team. Step up. If they need something, make sure they have the support. They will become a raving fan of you and the company. My company where I was with, I could have become the biggest raving fan if they had just taken care of me a little bit. I'd still be with them today. I'd be advocating for them today, and I could be the greatest spokesperson they ever had if they had just taken care of me. Unfortunately, they didn't, so that's why I left the company a few years later, because I didn't feel any more connection to the company. I had no more certainty. I love talking about mission-focused leadership. And people ask me all the time, what's mission-focused leadership? I'm going to share a little story on how this came about and what it is and why it's important to what you do, and not only in your personal life, but also in your business. Back in 1999, I had the high honor and privilege of escorting a gentleman named General Norman Schwarzkopf, a 4-star general, the general in Central Command, the general who won the Iraq War in world record time. And I had the opportunity to escort him for the day. Now, I don't know if anybody here has ever been around or with a 4-star general, but it's quite intimidating, and I was pretty intimidated. But when I was with him, as I was driving him from the airport to the hotel, I asked him, could I ask you a question, General? He looked at me and said, are you just asking or you really want to know? And it sort of put me back for a second. I'm like, whoa. So I have one question. He said, go ahead. I said, how did you win the war in Iraq so quickly? And he looked at me and gave his standard pat answer. Now, everybody who's at that level has their standard pat answer. You get good at it after about 1,000 times. You get it down pretty well. But then I did something that he wasn't expecting. I said, sir, can I ask you another question? He goes, no one ever asked a general second question. He said, looked at me and said, well, go ahead. Are you just asking? Yeah, go ahead. I said, how did you really win the war in Iraq? And he looked at me like, this kid's pretty audacious. No one's ever asked me that. No one ever asked me a follow-up question. He goes, I'll tell you how I won it. He said, every day I'd go into the theater. People would come to me with their problems. People would say, women had to cover their heads. Women couldn't drive the tanks. They had to pray 5 times a day. I kept reminding my troops, how does this contribute to kicking Saddam out of Kuwait? He said, that's all I did every day. I reminded everybody of the mission. And I also realized maybe that's why he didn't go to Baghdad and clean it up, because it wasn't his mission. Fast forward 10 years. I'm in the green room of the early show on CBS with Captain Sullenberger and a lot of the other passengers. I had not talked to the captain up to this point. This is probably 3 or 4 weeks after the plane crash. But I go up to Captain Sullenberger for the first time and go up to him and said, Captain, man, you got to tell me, how'd you pull this thing off? And he looked me in the eye and said, I had a mission to get the plane down with 0 fatalities. And I was like, wow. So I started putting 2 and 2 together. I'm like thinking of all these people that I've talked to, all these leaders, some of these great leaders even. And the common trait between all of them is they were focused on the mission. They kept reminding the team of the mission. And yes, they had to course correct at times, but they checked their egos at the door. They let the people who knew how to do the mission, course correct if they needed to, but keep people's eyes on the ball. So that's of the mission. And that's why I developed this program called Mission Focused Leadership, because I can now teach some of these strategies on what these great leaders do to help people identify the mission, help people keep focused on the mission so they can get the outcome of the mission. You're seeing a picture from the plane crash that day. You'll see a guy with bald head under the S hanging out of the plane. That's me. The first picture that was released on Good Morning America was me, the bald-headed guy hanging out of the plane. And as I mentioned earlier, when I got to the door, I was looking to get on the wing of the boat, but there was no room on the wing of the boat. They're already filled up. So that's why I was on the plane about waist deep into 36-degree water for about 7 minutes. And you notice I'm on a lifeboat, and the reason why is this. The Hudson River's got a very fast current. The plane actually floated down the river about a half a mile in 24 minutes. So the little lifeboat kept going in and out from the plane. And they were screaming, hold on, hold on. So that's why I held on to this lifeboat waist deep in 36-degree water as close as I could to the wing. So I had an exit out. But I want you to take a better look at this picture, especially if you've seen the movie Sully. Now, if you've seen the movie Sully, this will give you, not only validate what you saw in the movie, but help you explain what I'm talking about leadership. So if you look at this picture closely, what you will not see in this picture is any of the crew. All the crew went out the left side of the plane. The right side of the plane was managed by passengers. People had 0 skill sets in this. People had 0 training. People were just going through a traumatic life event who had to step up and manage a situation they had no business managing. But that's what happens when you have leaders step up. See, what you'll realize in life, and you can take away, one of the takeaways from this talk is this: the person with the most certainty in uncertain times becomes the leader. It does not matter whether you're the CEO of the company or you're the janitor. And that person who gives certainty in that moment of time becomes the leader. And that's what happened on this side of the plane, because you look at this, no crew, people who had to give certainty gave certainty to people so they could get things done and get people out. And I'll give you a perfect example and bring all this together in one story of sensory acuity, state management, and leading at the same time. If you think of this picture, if you go out, midway out the wing was a lady. She was holding on to a baby. In fact, she had two kids on this plane. She had a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old she was holding on to. And she wasn't moving. She was stifled. And first thing I thought was, man, she tries to go on this lifeboat with this child, slips, gets into the river, because you got to remember, not only is it 36-degree water and the wing's underwater, but you got jet fuel, which is slick. So I thought I got to do something that for either me to get out of here or people to get out who are on the boat. So I yelled at her. I yelled, "Throw the baby, throw the baby." Now, candidly, I didn't think she was going to throw her baby. I didn't think that was going to happen. But I got her attention, and I broke her pattern. So what I just did is something that I learned about sensory acuity and state management. She was in a focused state at that point. There's nothing but focusing on how am I going to hold on to my baby and not go into the river. I had to break it, and the way I broke it is through an auditory command, throw the baby. Now, that's something, one of the ways you do this in business is you ever get into a team meeting and people are sitting around the table and no one's doing anything and everybody doesn't have the answer, you got to do something radical to break them out of that state. So yelling, throw your baby to a lady who's holding her baby who's scared will get her attention. And she looked at me and she's like, what? But if you look at the picture with the lady with her head turned to the right, she just happens to be a mother of 3 from Knoxville, Tennessee. She heard me yell this at this lady, told her to give her the baby. She gave her the baby and got on the lifeboat, and people started walking down the wing. So in that just a few seconds, I used some of the skills that I learned through state management, through sensory acuity, going into a modality that I could resonate with, breaking the power. I went totally against the modality. She was in a kinesthetic modality. She wasn't visual. She wasn't auditory, but I had to get her into an auditory modality because it was loud going on, and I had to break that pattern. And all of a sudden, leaders stepped up. I gave her certainty in a time of uncertainty. So this picture really represents to me a lot of different things. I get very emotional when I see this picture, but it also brings together pretty much what happened on the right side of the plane. Just think, 155 people who do not know each other or care about each other pulled together to do something that had never been done in the history of aviation, who had zero training, zero experience, and did something that never had happened in the history of aviation, just by using some of these skills and strategies that I've shared with you today. Last thing I'll share is this. I had the privilege last year of attending a seminar, and it was led by one of the coaches who won the Super Bowl recently, and it was an amazing seminar because this coach is not really well known for his communication skills. But he was giving a seminar, giving a little talk, and I was there. And one of the things he mentioned was this, and I thought it was fascinating when I heard this. And that's why I adopted it, I installed it in my life, and I teach it now, especially to youth and to business people. He said the first day of training camp, when they come in, the first day what he does is get everybody in the room. You have all the rookies, all the free agents, all the veterans together. And as he's talking, before he starts going into anything significant, he asks everybody to get out a piece of paper. And he said, for the next minute, I want you to write on this piece of paper, what kind of person do you need to be to win a championship this year? And some people get very confused because they say, well, I got to do 5,000 push-ups, 5,000 sit-ups, I got to do this many reps, It's not about what you have to do, it's what kind of person do you need to be? What do I need to be persistent? Do I need to be aware? Do I need to have faith? What kind of person do I need to represent and raise my standard to be able to win a championship? And after a minute, he tells everybody to put their paper down and to get their mobile phones out, whether it's a Google or Apple, it really doesn't matter. He said, get out, go into the alarm section, notification section, and take what you just wrote down and put it in there and set your alarm to 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and night. So 3 times a day for the this season, from now until the end of the season, you will be reminded of what you just committed to be a champion for this team. And so 3 times a day, that little alarm goes off, and you start looking at it, thinking, oh, yeah, you're right. On August 1st, I committed to be a team player, be persistent, be aware, be faithful, be focused. And all of a sudden, it gets in your brain and you raise your standard. And everybody on that team raises their standard, so it goes back to the success cycle we talked about. You get that certainty, you get the potential, and you get the action and results. You keep getting it, all of a sudden, it gets into that cycle, and you have a chance to be a champion. Take that tool, not only use it for you, but share it with your teams that you work with right now. Share it with those folks. Have everybody do this. Tell everybody get a piece of paper out the next meeting. Write down what kind of person do you need to be, not what you have to do, what kind of person do you need to be. Put it in your cell phones and make sure you hold people to that standard. And when it goes off, and look at it, take it in really quick. Say, you know what, so I committed to it, I got to do it. I'm not playing at that level, so I can't win. I can't help the team achieve the outcomes we're looking to achieve. It's a tremendous, tremendous tool. So I just want to do a quick recap before I do a Q&A. I hope some of this information was beneficial to you. I love talking about this. You know, the Miracle on the Hudson was an experience. It was really a business case wrapped up with so many different lessons. But hopefully I share some with you a little bit about some leadership strategies that were employed that day that you can use on how to give certainty to people. Skill sets about to bring your teams to play on the same level, about understanding why people do what they do. How to use sensory acuity to communicate more effectively, not only in your teams but also in your relationships. And how to use this tool I just talked about being able to set yourself and set standards for your team and yourselves and hold people to that so you can achieve the outcomes much quicker than you anticipated. I think if you do these 4 things and take one or all 4 of these things, you can make massive progress, and that's what life is all about. It's not about getting the outcome. It's about making massive progress every time we do something. It's about taking that first step. So I want to say thank you very much for having me today. I'm blessed and honored to be here. Especially what's going on, as we know, in Texas, there's a lot of people affected. Please keep them in your thoughts. I'm doing a lot of work with the Red Cross right now. And Rick, I'll be more than happy to take any questions if anybody has any right now.
Excellent. Thank you, Dave, again for a wonderful presentation. And we'll give Dave a second here just to kind of catch his breath before we go to questions, so that I can remind you that if you'd like to write an educational article for pathology leaders, you should send an email to Eric Heilman, and here is his email address, and we'll be providing this address in the chat box in just a few minutes. Okay, let's move now to questions, and this is a question actually that came in during the earlier session as well, something very much like this, which is probably the first question that most people want to ask. So what was it like getting on a flight again after the Miracle on the Hudson?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because the next day I went back, and candidly, guys, I was being told what to do. I was being moved. I had a handler. My person's name was Doreen. So I did pretty much anything Doreen told me to do. But the following week, as I mentioned, when I went to my office and my manager asked me if I was going to Michigan next week, I agreed to do it. And, you know, I was put on Delta, you know, because it was less cost, and there's nothing wrong with Delta. But I tell people, you know, I was a rock star on U.S. Airways. No one knew me on Delta. So when I got on the plane, I was a little bit shaky. Number one, I was by myself again on a plane. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know if anybody knew who I was until someone recognized me, and the captain finally came back. He gave me some certainty as we were flying to Michigan. But that was the toughest flight. But I tell people, you have to get back on the plane. There's still people from the Miracle on the Hudson that have not gotten back on the plane yet. And I didn't know that until I was on Oprah with that lady with the baby. And I was talking to her, and she still has not gotten back on a plane yet. They put her on a train from New York to Chicago. And that's when I realized a lot of people still haven't got back on planes yet. So my recommendation to people is, if you face a personal, you know, traumatic experience, whatever it is, you got to face it. You got to do it so you don't have that fear going forward. But it was a tough time the next week, Rick.
I'll bet it was. You know, it used to be get back on the horse, but I guess transportation habits have changed, huh? So, yeah, that must have been a heck of an experience getting on that next flight, I'm sure. So the next question is, can you comment, please, on post-traumatic growth syndrome?
Yeah, I appreciate that. This topic sort of came to me about 2 years ago when I did, started and did a TED Talk around post-traumatic growth syndrome. What is that? It's how do you grow from a traumatic life event instead of going into a depressed state? And I didn't know what this was until AARP magazine asked me to do an article, an interview, and I knew nothing about it, and I never thought I was too young for AARP anyway, but they explained what it was they wanted to talk to, because they found out that I helped the American Red Cross raise over $12 million, and they wanted to understand the strategies I used to grow from this instead of going to a depressed state like so many other people had. And so I agreed to do this, and they shared this post-traumatic growth syndrome strategy with me, and I all of a sudden started realizing that's what happened. Because after the plane crash, guys, I had so many people come up and say, you're going to be depressed, you're going to need therapy, you're going to need to have all this, you're going to need a psychiatrist, but I didn't. And I kept saying, what's the difference between me and some of the other passengers? And I realized it's on how I process this and the meaning I attach to it compared to other people. If you saw the movie Sully, you notice that Sully went into PTSD, depression. And we knew something was going on with him as passengers because we were around him a lot, but no one knew exactly. But now you know in the movie, Sully, the movie, you had PTSD where I had PTGS. And so I went the opposite direction because the meaning I attached to it was totally different than the meaning he attached to it. And that's exactly in life. I'll tell you, you can have the same experience with somebody else, and you can attach two different meanings and have two different experiences. So that's what PTGS is, opportunity to grow from a traumatic life event.
Very, very good point. And we have reached almost the top of the hour, so we have to say thank you very much for great presentation, Dave. Really appreciate all of that. And
thank you.
I'd like to remind everyone once again, in case you might have missed this message, if you've got any ideas or articles, if you'd like to submit any educational articles to pathology leaders, please get in touch with Eric Heilman, and Susanna has put Eric's email address into the chat box along with the link where you can access today's recording. She's just put it into the chat box, so copy and paste that and keep it for later. And if you've not bookmarked Pathology Leader's website yet, and you really should, because there is a wealth of knowledge on that website. If you would like to receive credit for today's session, PACE or Florida Laboratory CE or a certificate of attendance, when you leave the session and close the event window, you'll see the evaluation open in your browser. So don't close your browser and immediately fill out the evaluation so that you get your certificate within a day or two. We'll be emailing that link in the email to you after you receive your certificate of attendance. But if you wait a few days to send your certificate in, it can take up to 2 weeks to receive your certificate. And I said certificate, but I meant evaluation. But you knew that. So be sure and keep your browser open when you close the event window. And also, for those of you who are joining us as a group, or if you're using a mobile device, you'll be receiving an email after the webinar as long as you're the person who's logged in. So if you've joined as a group, forward it to everyone who joined with you. And if you've joined on a mobile device, also you won't be landing on the evaluation. So keep an eye out for that email so that you can access it right after the evaluation and fill out, right after the webinar and fill out the evaluation. So I'd like to remind everyone again to be sure and send any unanswered questions to Eric Heilman as well. So you've got his email address. If you've got an article you'd like to submit, or if you have any questions that you have like to ask on this or any topic, feel free, please, to send them to Eric Heilman. So a big thanks to you, Dave, for a wonderful presentation today, for both presentations, actually. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You bet, and of course a big thanks to Leica Biosystems for this wonderful webinar series through Pathology Leaders, and also a biggest thanks go to all of you for joining us. We hope that you will join us again. So this is Rick Import for all of the entire staff at Pathology Leaders. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to having you with us again very soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye all.